The government has figured out that I feel like things sort of exist on a continuum. So on one side of the continuum, you obviously have material solutions. Like I want to buy something that's going to solve my problem. On the other side of the continuum is, hey, I'm going to pay for services and I'm going to pay someone to build me whatever it is that I need to solve my problem.
Thousands of companies show up to sell their technology to the US Department of Defense each year. But so few will transition from proof of concept to true production across the valley of death. The select few who do, their stories are rarely told. Until now. I'm Noah Scheinbaum, and this is Crossing the Valley. Today's guest is Michael Grochol, the CEO of Iron EagleX, a veteran-owned small business based in Tampa. Iron EagleX is applying Silicon Valley engineering concepts to defense missions. Today, the company has over 250 people and will earn north of $100 million in federal revenue. They've transitioned multiple other transaction agreements, or OTAs, from prototype to production as a bootstrapped startup. Today, we're going to learn how. All right, Michael Grochol, thank you so much for being with us here on Crossing the Valley. CEO of Iron EagleX, an engineering firm that is crushing it inside the defense market with a number of large contracts, doing so in near record time, and most importantly, doing so in a way that matters to the warfighter. Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Noah. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you today.
Yeah, I love it. Iron EagleX is, you guys have been making some waves, not necessarily the big venture-backed company that's in all the headlines, but as it pertains to the warfighter, as it pertains to the folks doing the mission, you guys are making a pretty big difference. So this is going to be a fun conversation. Before we talk about the company, Michael, I want to talk a little bit about you. You've got a really interesting background, both in service and then in industry. Tell us a little bit about who you are and how you found yourself in this position at this time.
It's definitely been an interesting journey to kind of end up here. I, as a kid, was very into technology, was, writing software on my parents' Apple IIe computer when I was like 7 or 8 years old, and, really loved the technical side of things. And I think in a lot of ways, growing up in Silicon Valley, I grew up in Pacifica, which is just south of San Francisco, went to school in the city, sort of always assumed that I would end up in the tech industry. It was what I loved. It was what my family members did, et cetera. And then September 11th happened. Obviously, it shocked us as a country and our nation. And the other thing that I always loved to do when I was a kid, like, me and my best friend would always just go like hike up in the hills, and, we would play sort of, G.I. Joe, up there in the hills, and had paintball guns and all kinds of stuff. And so I still loved, obviously, what our country and what our country stood for. That was a pretty seminal moment for me where I felt like, in a lot of ways, for my generation, that was the equivalent of Pearl Harbor. That was kind of our call to service. And so I joined the military right out of high school. In 2003, I actually turned 18 at basic training. So, that initial contract, I actually didn't even sign it. Your parents sign it for you to say that you can go in. Ultimately, I knew that I wanted to be involved in sort of technology, which was something I always loved, but I also knew that I wanted to be involved in sort of national security and that warfighting effort for counterterrorism. So I joined right out of high school initially as an aircrew and enlisted aviator. I initially flew on AWACS, which is a surveillance aircraft that does command and control for the enterprise. But ultimately, that wasn't really what I loved or wanted to do. I wanted to get in the special operations community. And at the time, doing that through the jobs that I was in, you had to have prior enlisted experience. You couldn't go directly into that. So I got lucky enough to go to selection for Air Force Special Operations Command, and then ended up becoming a crew member on AC-130 gunships, which was a fantastic opportunity and weapon system to get to be a part of. I got to do 6 combat deployments, all in Iraq, as a member of AC-130s. Did some other stuff in support of the special operations community during my time, and ultimately really got to sort of serve, on some of the more interesting, critical, and, at times dangerous missions that happen in support of the most elite units in the world. And among that, sort of fell in love with, obviously, the special operations community and what it means, and really, in a lot of ways, just how hard it is, what the standards that they set, and just how much they, demand of the people that, want to be good enough to serve in that world. Then sort of transitioning out of the military, I had the opportunity to work as a deployed contractor for a period of time, and work supporting the Defense Department and the intelligence community. And then finally, I got the opportunity to work in the acquisition center at SOCOM. Obviously, you need folks to buy things in support of acquisition, but you also need folks that have domain experience and engineering experience that can sort of help determine is what we're buying going to be what's in the best interest of the warfighter. And so by doing that, I got to see sort of, I had that operational experience having been sort of on the objective and doing that work in the deployed environment. Now I was in the scenario where I was helping to acquire the capabilities and, field test them and do all the things that were necessary for what was that next generation capability that SOCOM was going to buy. And that was just a really great opportunity. And luckily got paired with a really great government civilian who was the person actually buying the capability. And he taught me everything he knew about the government process for how they did acquisition. So I went really from, sort of that, big dumb operator just going out and trying to blow stuff up to someone who had to understand the fiscal policy that was required to do things, what the requirements process was, and how the government actually acquired things, and then even got to sort of help them decide these are the better technologies versus those. And then through that, really was inspired watching those businesses deliver those capabilities and felt like I wanted to get into that game, right? That I no longer wanted to be just the user of technology or even just the acquirer of technology. I wanted to be the people who were actually building those capabilities for the warfighter. So then sort of set off on, and I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit in this podcast, sort of a journey to learn all the things I felt I needed to learn to be able to do that, right? It wasn't just, hey, I just jumped out and started a company. You see folks do that, and some of them turn out to be successful, but I think a lot of them spend a lot of time struggling to figure that out. My path has always been on some level sort of a reverse engineer at heart. So I find the things that I love or the things that I think are interesting, and I like to tear them down to their nascent parts and understand everything that made them what they are. So that's kind of what I did around starting a company. Was I spent a period of time learning all of the different facets of our industry through different careers, and then ultimately, felt like I had enough knowledge to be dangerous, and here we are.
We are definitely going to come back to that. The show initially was focused on technology and capability transition, but at a core of that, and you just put your finger right on it, Michael, is the reality that there's such a human element of transition as well. And becoming a great founder in this space really requires having experience or at a minimum, deep empathy for folks in these different roles. We talk about kind of the holy trinity of government contracting, of the user, the buyer, and the contractor or the budget, however, people frame it differently. You just articulated how you'd been in at least two of those roles from the user perspective and the contracting perspective before you even really kind of set out on the company trail. So it is helpful reminder of how things are slightly different in this industry versus a company that you kind of start in your garage as a college student or something like that. So you're now at Iron EagleX. We'll talk about kind of the gap between, where you left the Air Force and then how you got to this place. But just get folks on target with what is Iron EagleX for those who are hearing about it for the first time? Like, who are you guys and what do you do?
Yeah, so we're a defense tech solution company. So the general idea is that what we love is when the customer has really hard problems, particularly in the special operations or intelligence community, and they need a particular technical or mission solution to do that. So ultimately, I look at it very much in the mindset that I had, as an operator back in the day, which is like, what is the desired effect or the desired end state that they're looking for? So, a lot of times, has a software component for us. The customer says, we have all of this data that we're really interested in understanding better, and we need to be able to get that data on the network. We need to be able to have the underlying tools on the network that allow us to analyze it and build applications or do data science, machine learning on that. And we deliver those capabilities. A lot of times for us, that comes in the form of people, right? People that do that particular stuff. So maybe a services type contractor. But in addition to that, we also build a lot of the same underlying capabilities over and over and over again, whether that's the way that we deliver platforms, the way that we interact with data. And it's that proven ability to get our capabilities on the network over and over again that has really been sort of our secret sauce. I think when you look at a lot of the companies that are trying to break in, whether that's folks that are coming from Silicon Valley or even folks from the traditional defense industry, what a lot of times they struggle with is delivering that capability on the network. There are a lot of additional difficult security requirements to operate on the networks that our customers are at. to get the data to them that they need. And we've really carved a niche for ourselves by understanding that and then being able to deliver that capability over and over and over again and at speed, right? It's not something that's taking us 6, 9, 12 months to do. We can get things on the network in, a matter of weeks, or a couple of months, because we understand the processes, we understand what that red tape is. I always sort of say that our real secret sauce as a business is our ability to run the maze faster than everybody else.
What do you think got you to the position of being able to do that?
Well, I think on some level, it's the empathy side of the fact that I sat on the other side helping the government acquire things, and I watched folks run into the same walls over and over and over again and get frustrated by the process. And I get it. We're not going to lie to each other here. There's a lot of bureaucracy and red tape that exists in the government environment. But first of all, a lot of it exists for a reason. Whether it's the right reason or the wrong reason, it exists for a reason. And second of all, you can either complain about it and feel sorry for yourself, or you can just, admit that it's a difficulty and it's a challenge and then work around it. So I think that is maybe at the core of even our business itself, is that, we're going to figure out how to deliver, like by, with, or through, right? If we have to tunnel underneath the wall, like that's what we'll do. Give me the spoon, I'll start digging. So that's really what it is. We understand the process, we become an expert in it, and then we ultimately, deliver what they need as quickly as possible.
So if you think about, Michael, where you were, you mentioned you needed to have a set of experiences to get to the point where Iron EagleX was even possible. What were you looking for? What were the experiences you were looking to kind of string together into a portfolio that prepared you for this? And how did you know you were ready?
Well, first of all, I'll answer the second question first, which is I don't think you ever know for sure that you're ready. I think on some level, you got to kind of get to this point where you're just like, okay, I'm just willing to take the leap of faith that I can do it. But you can back that up with having a track record of success in certain areas that gives you enough of a belief to say, hey, I think I can do it. But I think on some level, you never know for sure. You got to just be willing to take the leap. But for me, and this will sound like a more articulate answer, it was not as nearly as articulated in my own head at the time when I was doing it, but I've spent a lot of time thinking about how you build a company like this, because obviously we're trying to scale. So we've grown so much that we really have to be able to articulate even to our own teammates, here's what we're doing, here's how that looks, and here's the processes that we're using to get there. So I break our industry up into 3 major buckets or pillars. The first is growth, your ability to grow the business, have something that the customer ultimately wants to use you for. What problem do you solve? Then manage, which is your ability to deliver whatever it is that they just bought from you. So they're like, hey, I want you to provide me those 10 people, or I want you to provide me this widget. How am I going to actually deliver that to your doorstep to do what you put it on contract to do? And then the last part is operate, the ability to create that ecosystem that makes all of that possible, right? When that can be simple things like taxes, payroll, HR, 401k, those types of things, or it could be more complex things of, again, how do you establish a business structure, to automate in processing, or, how you manage employees through a single dashboard or whatever works for your business. While I didn't know that those were necessarily the 3 pillars in as simple of a manner at the time, what I did sort of realize was that those things existed, that you obviously needed to get business, you obviously had to be able to deliver, and then you obviously had to be able to manage the company. And so I was able, through the couple of jobs that I had post-service prior to IEX, to sort of acquire those skills, to work at organizations that were smaller, and one larger organization, which was, L3 at the time, which was later acquired by CACI, and see how, they operated and did those things. And taking those lessons learned, I used that. A funny story is when I left a company that I worked for called Transvoyant and I went to ISPA, I actually had the ability to start my own company right then. I had an opportunity from a customer that wanted to give me work, that wanted me to start a company. And it wasn't a small amount of work. It was probably $3 to $4 million of initial, annual revenue. But the truth is I knew I wasn't ready. I knew that I knew how to grow business because I had done that before. And I had sort of what I would describe as a level 1 understanding of how to manage work. But I didn't understand that at a graduate level by any stretch of the imagination. And I definitely had no knowledge or insight on that ecosystem of how to run a company. And that's not an easy thing to do. That's why people get entire degrees, in business administration, is because it's a very difficult space to operate in. And again, running a company is being able to do all 3 at the same time at the highest level. So that was what I was able to learn. And then that prior experience was not just how to level up in my ability to sell or level up in my ability to deliver customer capabilities, but how do you manage that actual company? So in that case, we were able to take a company that was, a very small entity, a true sort of startup where there was only one person on overhead, which is the CEO at the time, and grow it and build out the team and hire the folks that were necessary to build it.
It's such a different approach. I love the term of reverse engineering. We love different models on this show and just generally, I love talking to people who have different mental models for the world. And just talking about, hey, this is what I think I need to do this job well, and let me go get those experiences. It's just not something you see every day. So I think it's really neat that not only you had that thought, Michael, but that you actually pursued it. In some ways, probably worked out better than you hoped. And in some ways, maybe you're like, oh no, there's new gaps that I didn't know existed, but you're learning every day. So thanks for sharing that with us. I want to pivot and dive into the business because you mentioned you're not just doing kind of small scale stuff, you're built for growth. I'd love to start with the actual model of how you all work. You mentioned that you're a solutions company. You've said, hey, we're a tech company with federal clients. We're not a traditional government contractor. But can you lay out for us, Michael, just what is the IEX model? What kinds of problems do you go after? And then how do you deliver? Is it all services? Is it some services, some product? Is it all product? What are the different delivery modalities that you all have?
Yeah, so I think to answer that second part, I'd say overwhelmingly it's services for us. The products that we have come as we've built things for customers and we've been able to retain some IP relative to what we're building. So we've been able to build a platform as a service, as an example, which is a secure environment that can operate on all three networks. So from unclassified to secret to top secret, with a continuous ATO. So we had a particular initial sort of test bed customer who wanted us to build that as a subcontractor. We did that. It worked really well. We took the lessons learned from that and then ended up winning a future contract, which was a significant sort of step up. But we still had the engineers who had that experience. So we sort of started from scratch and we built our own infrastructure as code for that particular customer. And then we've even internally invested to upgrade that a couple of times to give us that continuous ATO. So now when we meet with customers and they talk about how, in particular, hey, one of the things we really want to do is we want to get these capabilities on the network. We want to deploy these things quickly. We can show up and say, well, we actually have a fully built out infrastructure as code, platform as a service that you can deploy within hours and then be able to do this. Now, usually they have some paperwork they have to do on their side as it relates to, getting that ATO and getting that approval from their J6. But what we also can show them is, hey, we've already done this paperwork before. It's already secured. It's already operating on these other networks. So you're going to start, a lot farther forward in the process. So I think we start there, as that platform. And then ultimately we want to build applications that solve whatever their particular problems are, or, obviously something that's a really growing thing, particularly within the government, is the data science and machine learning side. So we're doing everything from, yes, we're actually deploying large language models in classified environments. It is actually happening, to, more traditional data science type work where we're doing things like, known associates or known traveler algorithms to look for patterns within data. And then obviously for our customers, help them identify usually bad guys or, malicious actors so that they can either, remove them from the battlefield in some scenarios or otherwise maybe mitigate the threat that they provide. As far as our process, we sort of take two approaches simultaneously. So I think you've got the traditional sort of business development process that exists in government contracting, which we're very familiar with. It's the idea that you pull opportunities for all intents and purposes off of SAM.gov and you compete for that work in whatever way that the government decides to compete in, typically a FAR-based contract. But the other way that's been really successful for us is on the OTA side. So as OTs have become a lot more prevalent, particularly in the special operations community, which has used several of them, the government has figured out that I feel like things sort of exist on a continuum. So on one side of the continuum, you obviously have material solutions. Like I want to buy something that's going to solve my problem. On the other side of the continuum is, hey, I'm going to pay for services and I'm going to pay someone to build me whatever it is that I need to solve my problem. And when you do a FAR-based contract, you select somewhere on that continuum as it relates to your requirements and you say, this is what I want. So it's either mostly product with just a touch of services, or it's lots of services with maybe just a touch of product. What an OTA allows the customer to do, in my mind, is it allows you to slide up and down that continuum across that period of performance to build whatever they want. So a lot of times, if we can get with customers early and we have the intimacy, with them in our world to say, hey, we see your problem, 2 years out into the future. Have you thought about this as a way that you might acquire it, right? So instead of saying, hey, it's going to be a FAR-based contract, it's going to come out on this GWAC vehicle that we've selected. No, we're going to view the problem more as this is the problem behind the problem. We call it on our engineering and user-centered design side of like, okay, I get that you want an application that does X, Y, and Z, but what is the purpose of that? What are we trying to do? Are we trying to speed up your workflow? Are we trying to look through data faster? Are we trying to, get information to a guy in the field faster? What is that problem behind the problem that we're trying to solve? So we try to do that also from an acquisition level. And I think we have folks that work here that were former government program managers, folks like myself who were, technical CETA contractors. So when we meet with program offices, that's really what we're trying to get to with them as well is, hey, what is that real problem that warfighter has? And how can we help you design even an acquisition strategy that addresses it? So I think those are sort of the two pillars of what we're doing.
Yep. So traditional BD and then kind of newer age, other transaction authority or OT-based opportunity development.
Even in the areas where we obviously do traditional BD, we're trying to, in a lot of ways, transition the customer to that other methodology, showing them the flexibility and the success that we've had through doing that and why that might be a better fit for them in the long term. But again, we've got a really fantastic team at that traditional process. And I think that is where a lot of companies, I think, unfortunately miss the boat is if a customer buys something a certain way, and you can even, extend this to the commercial industry. If you want to do business with Apple and Apple buys things in a particular way, the last thing you're going to do is show up to a meeting with Apple and tell them why their methodology stinks and why that's not the right way to buy whatever it is. Now, who knows? Maybe they're the one company that would really enjoy that, but most people don't want you to show up to the meeting to pitch them something to tell them why they don't know what they're doing. And I think, unfortunately, that's what a lot of folks try to do with the government is they try to show up and tell them, well, you're not doing it the right way. And they're not taking into account what I describe as like the existing constraints that they have, particularly around the government. Apple can decide to, hey, I'm just going to buy a product instead of buying a service today because they don't have what the government has, which is like colors of money, which under fiscal law and Congress says this is the very particular way that you have to handle this particular problem. But the government does have that problem. And if you do understand that and you do have empathy for that, then you can work with them to be able to solve the problem under the rules of that maze that they have to run. And so that's really where we start. But also, if you build a trusted relationship with them, then you can work with them to change that in the future, right? Because again, they have to plan 2, 3, 4, 5 years out into the future. And that's where we've sort of shown, hey, we're in this for the long haul with you. We understand the challenges that you have. We can deliver the problem you have right now while preparing you for the problem you're going to have.
I think it's a great example. There are certain countries in the world where you show up and you bargain for everything you buy. You're in a market, you're negotiating. But you don't walk into Apple and then say, hey, I'd love to buy this a different way. I know you said the MacBook is $1,899. How about I give you $1,200? And some people might say, hey, that's really good rejection therapy. You should try that once in your life. But the reality is, as educated consumers, few of us would do that. You recognize this is how they buy, this is how they sell. And so why there is kind of a notion that the government gets this wrong and so it's okay to critique. I think it's always, look, in the spirit of constructive criticism and of citizenship, it's always good to help the country do a little bit better. But I think where you're coming from, Michael, of starting from a place of trust, earn the right to have those conversations by showing that you understand the mission and that you can deliver for them, and you get a much better outcome. And so let's talk about some of those outcomes, because what folks may not know is one of the fastest growing small businesses, certainly in the sector, potentially, but perhaps in the country, you have taken an approach around other transaction authority and managed to get hundreds of millions of dollars on contract, transitioning from prototype other transactions to production other transactions. It's one of the interesting, mechanisms. We've had other guests on the show talk about those vehicles and coming through. The Defense Innovation Unit does a lot of this work. Let's take an example, Michael. I'd love to start with a problem that a customer brought to you and how you all kind of attacked it and got started on a prototype OT, and then we'll talk about the transition.
few examples for us, some smaller microcosms, and then obviously we have a really large OTA. For the large one, what ultimately happened is the customer was doing a lot of really high-end software engineering in a lot of different places. So they actually had 7 different contracts where they were doing things around analytics. Well, underlying platform to provide those analytics, that was one part of their contract. And then they had all kinds of different contracts actually doing the analytics themselves against a myriad of data sets. And then they were doing custom applications, to also create, whether it was custom user interfaces to view that data or just different methods to, solve other problems they had. So they thought that this was, and they were correct, a great opportunity to develop sort of a software factory approach to that, and consolidate all of that work. A large undertaking to be able to do this because you're talking about, 7 contracts. They had 5 prime contractors, all who measured their revenues in billions doing this work. They had, 10,000 users that they supported and a network that consistently had 2,000 plus users on it at once. And they were operating across 3 classification levels. So they had unclassified work, they had work that operated at the secret level, and work at the top secret SCI level. Ultimately, what they did through the prototype was they said, hey, we want a team that can manage all of that. And that's a big lift. So their process initially was to bring in companies that had to go through an initial sort of vetting period to submit some relevant past performance. Where have you operated in cloud environments that are similar to the ones that we're trying to do? Where have you done application development that's relevant to the type of applications we work with, et cetera? They brought us all into a room and they explained their problem. And they actually put us in front of all of the different offices that were in there and gave us a couple hours to not only just brief us on it, but then we could go up and ask one-on-one questions with those different offices to talk through what their challenges were and go through that. And that was fantastic. Then they asked us to put together sort of an initial white paper of, how would we do it? How would we architect it? Big picture, sort of, I refer to it as like a book report on, how we would deliver that. And we did that. And then they decided, okay, we're going to take that group of folks who did that sort of met those quals. We're going to ask them to come in and give us an oral presentation on how they would do that for a particular type of data that they had. They gave us representative data that, met their needs. They gave us an underlying problem set for what that platform that all that had to reside on, and then an application that they needed. So we put together a team and we went into that room and we gave them a plan. We said, hey, this is how we would do it. They used a really well-known Wolf data science data set, and it's from Canada. And we put together this way and we were going to track the wolves and be able to identify who the key players were and stuff like that. And we jokingly named one of the wolves Vlad. And the day we went in to do our oral presentation was actually the day that Russia invaded Ukraine. I don't know if that was good timing or bad timing, but it was really interesting to flash that up and be like, this is Vlad, and this is how we're going to track Vlad forward. I was like, it's either a good joke or a bad one. But ultimately, through that process, they selected 2 companies to deliver the prototype. And I can tell you that there were 12 companies that got to do the oral presentation. 10 of those 12 companies measured their revenues in billions. The 2 companies that got selected did not. I don't think that was an accident. I don't think it was in any way the customer trying to tip the scale towards small business. In fact, it was definitely not the case. It was just ultimately who they felt like really understood from a high-end technology perspective. How are you going to bring all this together? And so then we, sort of got into a cage match, because it was a competition between us and the other organization, which was and is a fantastic technical company. And we were able to both deliver successful prototypes. Both sides delivered successful prototypes. We were just, selected as the one that they felt like was the right fit for their mission. And what was really cool about that process was through a period of 8 weeks, the government observed us delivering everything that we pitched in that meeting. And it was sort of, we lived in the biodome, as I described it, and they watched us deliver an agile software factory that had a platform that did data science, machine learning, did application development, built a custom user requirements, and did it at scale with their users and sort of providing that feedback of, I don't like this, I do like that. This is how, I like the products you've developed, et cetera, et cetera. It was fantastic. And then after being chosen as the winner for that program, it now became our job to transition all of those other programs, to take this methodology that we had proven for how we did user-centered design and how we deliver, and ultimately, remove those other companies that were part of that team. And we were able to successfully do that. It was a 6-month process to do it. There was over 150 personnel, some of which made sense to transition over to our team, a large chunk of which we actually had to replace because they sort of weren't in line with the methodology that we had. The ones that we did keep were absolutely amazing engineers or mission experts. We have a segment of them called mission managers, and their job is to be the on-site user expert. They sit with the different customers that get delivered these capabilities, and they train them on what we delivered, and they get that feedback on what we didn't deliver, either to their liking or in a lot of cases, what those new features are that they need to go through. And when we do our PIs, every 10 weeks, we get together and we sort of plan out that next sort of step. And when we do our PIs, they are, sort of the first people to talk, as it relates to this is what the customer actually needs. And they've built out such trusted relationships with their customer. Whereas before, the customer, the direct, military person would come to those PIs and sit there and feel like they had to, protect their equities. Now they trust those folks to where they say, nope, they've got it locked down. They know exactly what I need. And I know that in 10 weeks, I'm going to get things that answer the mail on what my problems are.
When you were on contract for that prototype OT to when you went to the production OT, what was the full time to do that?
So the prototype itself took 8 weeks. We were notified that we were the winner, if you will, 30 days later. And then we got started on about half the contract. So we had to transition a little less, I would say maybe 70 of the 80 FTEs or their work in the cases where we didn't keep folks. We had to transition that about 30 days later. And that happened pretty much instantaneously. That one, unfortunately, didn't have a very long transition timeline. It was, hey, those folks are gone. Your folks are in. And giddy up, let's go. On the other side, the 80 FTEs, we were lucky to have a more planned transition because of the 6 months and as well as the particular contractor and the way the government had structured that one particular contract. They had a transition out requirement. And so we were able to work with them over a 60-day transition out period to sort of suck as much information out of their heads as possible, hire the handful of folks that we needed, and then obviously get rolling on the rest.
That's incredible. The timeline you just laid out, Michael, is 8 weeks of a prototype and then 30 days later being on contract, production. It's almost unheard of. That is, you've kind of laid out almost a gold standard for speed. Not every program should, could, would work in that way. But I think for our government listeners, this is possible. And to hear kind of how this has happened is really fascinating. And then from a small business perspective or startup perspective, it's a testament to what it looks like when you have all three elements of that trinity, the user and the customer and the acquisitions folks, all working together towards a mission that really, really matters. It's a no-fail mission. Remarkable. I mean, really remarkable outcome and the speed. And it's not like this was a small contract. As you said, this is your largest OTA, hundreds of millions of dollars. I think you can't overemphasize how really unique that is. So thanks for sharing it, Michael.
No, absolutely. And I think part of the reason why we were able to do it was that we were built from the very beginning to be able to take on that sort of scale infrastructure, right? So I think that's especially an area that if I gave advice to any startup that was trying to do business in the government space is make sure that you've legitimately made plans to be able to scale at speed. If you do, if you are the dog who catches the car, that was something that we had circled and we had planned for 6 months in advance. And, it felt on some level like we were jinxing it to do that level of planning. Obviously, when you're tracking down a hundreds of millions of dollar contract that's going to more than double the size of your company instantly, there's a part of you that says, hey, I don't want to start counting my chickens before they hatch. But conversely, we really took the opposite approach because we knew we needed to. So we needed nearly a dozen overhead hires. I'm talking folks back here at the headquarters to be able to just manage the company. And we had already vetted all those folks. So from the time that we were awarded the contract, 10 of those 12 people started within 2 weeks. Like we pushed out their offer letters, they gave 2 weeks notice, and they were inside of our ecosystem and helping run the company. So From the very beginning, we've always done, and we talk about it internally, we do a plan annually called shutdown. And in shutdown, we build out for the next year, quarter by quarter, what are our objectives married against what are the things we think we're likely to win within our pipeline. Anything that's a large enough opportunity gets a very detailed plan for, in the military side, it's called an O plan, right? An operational plan. It's that break glass in case of emergency, Russia's coming through, or, the Soviet Union's coming through the Fulda Gap. What do we do relative to that to be able to, defend our interests? We do the same thing from a business perspective. Every large opportunity that we pursue, we build a plan around that. We know exactly what we have to do, whether that's we need to hire more recruiters, program management, finance, accounting, obviously the folks who have to execute the actual mission. We plan through all of that months in advance. And everyone understands their role across those three groups that we run. Again, we run a finance group, an operations group, and a growth group. Sort of back to that grow, manage, operate model that I talked about. And within that, we know exactly what to do. So we were not sort of caught flat-footed. We knew what departments needed to scale and what the KPIs were that we needed for those departments. And that's what we continue to do now. That's why we're not afraid. This year, hopefully, through the work we're able to win, we'll double in size again if we're able to do that. And we're not afraid to do that because we've built out a process to be able to sort of ingest that work.
Contingency planning is not jinxing yourself. It's actually just good business, it turns out. Very cool.
It is, yeah.
Let's move into some hot takes and a little bit of a lightning round here if you're game for it, because I know we're getting...
All right, let's do it.
Okay, close to the end. All right, cool. So some of your thoughts on the industry and looking forward. First, if you could go back and do it all again, what's one thing you would do differently?
If I could go back and do it all again, what would I do differently? I think I would, again, just being even more prepared for growth in certain ways that I sort of mentally wasn't there for. The hardest part about just hyper growth in general is that whatever process you build is going to break 60 days later, but it actually worked when you built it. So you implemented it. It was great. It did exactly what you wanted, but then you got to break it. So ultimately being able on some level to be like more transparent with people that you're hiring to say, hey, you're cool with this, right? Like you're going to come in, you're going to do a great job, and then we're going to break all of that. And then you're going to have to do a great job again, 60, 90, 180 days later. So I think that would be something I would try to do a little different.
Who should not enter the federal market?
I think anyone who doesn't understand that, first of all, the number one priority is supporting, the government writ large, right? So in our case, obviously, that's national security. But even if you're working in, a different part of the federal government, whether that's HHS or something like that, that ultimately, like our job here is to serve the taxpayer, and, in our particular case, to serve the warfighter and, national security. So I'd start with that. Anyone who views it as, okay, well, the government's great because they got a big checkbook or I'm going to get a long-term contract. Those are side benefits, but that's not the primary reason to do it. Secondary to that, anyone who's not willing to adapt to the system, you got to understand that like what makes our nation great is that you actually said it, I think, well earlier, is that as a citizen, you should absolutely not be afraid to give constructive criticism to, what goes wrong in our system. But constructive criticism means you got to be willing to be part of the solution, not just, the old man up in the theater box from the Muppets complaining about things. And so I think for us, we want to be part of the actual solution. The government gets things wrong, breaking news story. But, so does industry. And so does any human being that, walks the earth. So ultimately the job has to be to get it right and to have a relentless approach to doing that. So if you have those two things, you should absolutely get involved because, as a taxpayer, we need you. The war fighters need you if you get into this space.
Love it. What's something that most people get wrong about defense tech?
I think the thing that they get wrong is that the warfighters and the acquisition personnel at the very tip, they really do care if they get the best capability out there in the field. Sometimes they're constrained by an archaic process or, just a difficult ecosystem that they live in. But like these people really care. Like by and large, the average person that I meet in government, they really have a high, to say it bluntly, give a shit factor on what they're trying to do. And that's a great thing. So ultimately, you just got to align yourself to what that is. Sometimes I think, certainly been guilty of this, I think everybody is, you think your idea is the best idea. So therefore you get frustrated when that idea doesn't get selected. Back to what we try to do on the empathy side, I try to put myself in the shoes of the acquirer and say, like, why are they trying to buy what they're trying to buy? And why does that matter for them? Because again, by and large, everyone is like this, but especially in government, they want to do a fantastic job. So just enable that for them and you're going to get plenty of opportunities.
VC or bootstrapping?
Well, obviously we're bootstrapped, so I'm going to pick that. I think, VC is an interesting world. I've had meetings with folks that are incredibly successful in that world, whether it's because they started a company or, they're actually the VC folks that are backing it up. Their metrics for how they do things and the metrics for, I think, how you build a bootstrapped organization are diametrically, I think, opposed at times. Whereas as a business owner, we've thought about, how do we remain profitable, obviously, and how do we ingest the right revenue to be able to sort of build our business and build the infrastructure. Because of, by and large, they have a big pot of money, they don't think about the problem in that way. They think about, how do I get to scale as quickly as possible? And I'm willing to burn as much resources as I need to get to that scaled moment. That sounds great in theory. I don't know how well that plays in the government space, where again, the government needs to remain flexible to what's in its best interest in that moment and not necessarily what is the best business model for you. And I would argue as a taxpayer, you don't want the government to think about what's the best business model for industry. You want the government to think about what do we need to be able to deliver the best outcome for a citizen, for a taxpayer, period. And so I think bootstrapped companies, in my mind, tend to align better to that because they're trying to run great business fundamentals.
Fantastic. Last one in this round. We'll let you off the hot seat. What are you most excited about?
I'm really excited for the transition that I see happening in government technology right now. Like these things we're doing around OTAs, around really fast, agile delivery and user-centered design, like they're really picking up steam quite a bit. So I'm really excited to see that. What I'm worried about is that, is the government going to get so focused on trying to buy from startups that they forget that there's company like ours out there that are providing that same general, horsepower and capability, but are running maybe a slightly more traditional playbook that they saw those large integrators run. But I'm really excited for companies like ours to do two things. One, I hope be a model for those startups so that they will integrate some of the methods that we have and see more success. And two, also, so we have the opportunity to provide some change and be a change agent on that big integrator side, because they have a lot of amazing lessons learned and obviously scale and, bench, right? Like I envy a company with, 10,000 employees and the idea that just organically, there's just amazing people that I can just go pluck, not just onesie twosies or even 5 or 10, but, hundreds of brilliant engineers that, that they can tap to. So I think hopefully as they sort of see the way we deliver and the success that comes, whether that's on the balance sheet side or on the mission success side, that they morph to that model.
Fantastic. Michael, if somebody is interested in learning more about Iron EagleX or wants to buy into the mission, they want a seat on the rocket ship, how can they learn more? Where should they go?
Yeah. So especially for, engineers and folks that want to possibly join us on the hiring side, our website, ironeaglex.com is a great place to sort of view our open job recs and connect. Also, our LinkedIn page has, a decent amount of following and some of our staffing folks as well. So that for sure. As far as customers, similar method, obviously reaching out through the website or, LinkedIn is a great way for us to get linked up. And, we're blessed to support some of the, best customers in the world in the special operations and special activities side. And so they sort of know how to tap us on the shoulder when they need to, and we're ready to go.
Fantastic. Michael, thank you for taking the time. Thanks for being with us. Some awesome insights here. You've done a lot in not such a long time, and we're excited to watch you continue to grow and to deliver for the mission. So thank you for everything.
Yeah, thanks very much, Noah. I had a great time. I really appreciate the opportunity.